Welcome back to True Crime and Tea, or welcome to True Crime and Tea, where we sip slowly. I do actually have tea today as well, because it's True Crime and Tea, and I've got to be sipping tea. The time before that, I think I was drinking water. So, let's sip my tea. Welcome to True Crime and Tea, where we sip slowly and think deeply. Today's episode takes us into the eerie corridors of what history remembers as America's first known real serial unaliver. I hate that word, but I don't want it to flag, so I've got to use that word, unfortunately. But I don't think they were the first, actually. I think some evidence has come out since that may identify someone else as the first person. I know there was definitely a family, in the 1800s that were known to welcome people in and then bury them under the floorboards. Maybe I'll cover that story in another video. Let me know in the comments if you want to know who that family was and if you want me to cover the video, and I'll do the research on it. But this story today is about Herman Webster Mudgett, who is better known as H. Holmes. And I find him quite intriguing just because obviously I like true crime, and I find his mental abilities and capacity really fascinating to look at. I think for the amount of thought that he put into being a criminal, I feel like he could have put those efforts into something else and actually making something of himself. However, this story is more than just blood and bricks. It's about deception, historical context, and media manipulation in some sense, and an unsettling theory. And I don't know how much detail I'm going to go in, because I might want to make a completely different video on this, but the theory that H. Holmes was also Jack the Ripper. Now, I know there has been talks online, I think on TikTok in particular, where they think they may have uncovered who Jack the Ripper was, but I like my theory better. So I may make a completely separate video on the links between H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper and some of the more mysterious conclusions people have drawn. Probably going to be another video, but I may allude to it in this video. So stay tuned to see if I do. And make sure you have your coffee, herbal tea, juice brewed, because we are going to go through a journey of the murder castle across the Atlantic. So, Herman Webster Mudgett was born around May the 16th, 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. He was raised in an affluent family. His early years were marked both by privilege and peculiarities. By all appearances, he was an intelligent and curious child, but behind the boyish charm, there were darker tendencies that began to surface. According to some accounts, he was fascinated with medicine. I don't find that surprising. Some people did, but he was fascinated with medicine from a very young age, actually. And it was reported that he used to practice surgery on animals. Now, I don't know if those animals were amongst the living, because research didn't really show that. However, unaliving animals is one of the points of the triangle when it comes to the serial unaliver. So if they were not among the living, he's already ticked one of those boxes. One particular disturbing rumour suggests that he may have been involved in the unaliving or the death of a childhood friend, even though that has never been proven. So he may have started much sooner than people actually think, but this rumour did and has circulated. Later, as a medical student at the University of Michigan, Holmes started a string of scams that hinted at the disturbing enterprise he would later build. He stole corpses, disfigured them, and claimed life insurance money. claiming that they were accident victims. Ever the moneymaker. While that is morbid, it does show a high level of planning and cold, calculated disregard for human life. It's a pattern that would grow into something more gruesome as time went on, which we will go on and see. In 1865, Holmes moved to Chicago and adopted the alias of Dr. Henry H. Holmes. I love the alliteration there. I know I shouldn't, but I love the alliteration. Henry H. Holmes, aka H. Holmes. This wasn't just a name change, it was a transformation. He found work in a pharmacy, and shortly thereafter he took over that business. So he was employed in the pharmacy, and then he became the pharmacy owner. And rumor has it that he actually unalived the original owner. Death seems to follow him, alleged. I mean, he's gone now, but allegedly, death seems to follow H. Holmes wherever he goes. Again, evidence against him unaliving the owner is scarce. There's not much concrete there that says he did actually unalive the owner. But what we do know is that Holmes acquired a plot of land across the street from the pharmacy and began constructing what would become the infamous building in true crime history, and that was his murder castle, his unaliving hotel, or whatever you want to call it. It looked like a hotel from the outside, but inside it was a house of horrors. There was 3 stories high. The building was full of windowless rooms, secret staircases, trapdoors, and gas lines that ran into sealed rooms, and chutes that dropped straight into the basement. Holmes could lock a victim in a soundproof room, asphyxiate them with gas, and dispose of the bodies in acid vats, cremation kilns, or use surgical dissection. The planning, and dare I say it, the critical thinking of what of all the eventualities that could possibly happen while someone stays in my hotel, and how am I going to mitigate that risk? There was a lot of that went on here. Like, planned on how he's going to get them in. It's a hotel, okay? Planned on how he's going to help them meet their maker, right? Through the trap doors, the secret staircases, the windowless rooms. I don't know how that impacts, but obviously if there's a windowless room, no one can see in to see what you're doing. The trap doors. He said how he's going to keep them in there to be able to do what he needs to do. And he thought of disposal afterwards. So, I mean, in 1893, the Chicago hosted the World Columbian Exposition, which was a grand celebration of culture, technology, and progress. For Holmes, however, it was a hunting ground. It was a space for him to be able to find his victims. He turned parts of his murder castle into a hotel, offering lodgings to fairgoers, particularly single women who were arriving alone, and many were never seen again. There's a bit of a similarity there with the Ripper, because Jack the Ripper knew how to cut women in a certain way, and also only targeted women of the night. Not saying that he only targeted women of the night, but he targeted single women. So, a bit of a similarity there. Holmes often charmed these women by promising them work, or got engaged to them, only for them to vanish shortly after. He was an habitual fiance. He would get engaged to them and then they would disappear. He was able to operate largely unnoticed thanks to his charisma, his intelligence, and a city overwhelmed by the chaos of the fair. Because if you've got busy going on around you, no one's really going to notice the women that are going missing because they were single, no one's really looking for them, and now their fiance is the person that is doing this crazy stuff to them. In the castle walls, screams went unheard, and the smell of death masked by the industrial odour of the growing city. What makes this especially a haunting case is how normal Holmes seemed around other people, and how normal he seemed to the outside world. He was a polite businessman, a doctor, a suitor. He had charisma. He was able to invite people into a place that was basically going to make them go missing. He was Dr. H. Holmes. The transformation there, he worked in a pharmacy previously, so maybe people of the town or the people of the city knew him as, oh, that was the guy that worked in the pharmacy, now owns a pharmacy, and he's just, growing his enterprise because now he owns a hotel as well. So he was able to blend in at a time where so much change was happening. After the fair, Holmes left Chicago, but he didn't leave his criminal life. He continued running fraud schemes across the country. One involved a man called Benjamin Pitzel, was an associate who agreed to fake his own death for a $10,000 life insurance payout. But in true Holmes style, instead of faking his death, Holmes actually unalived him. Unalived him to cover his tracks. And then he manipulated Pitzel's widow and took 3 of her 5 children on a twisted journey. He managed to manipulate a mother into giving away 3 of her children to him. Over the following 3 weeks, he unalived all 3 children in separate locations. Yeah, he manipulated her into handing the children over. And for what purpose? Because he ended up unaliving them anyway, which I think is absolutely outrageous and atrocious. Eventually, the authorities caught up with him. He was arrested in Boston in November of 1894 after weeks of them trying to find him and after pursuit. During his time in custody, he confessed to 27 unalivings, though the real number is assumed to be much greater than that. And it's possibly assumed to be about 200, maybe more. I mean, given the fact that he was running a hotel with all of these other different methods of disposing of a corpse, I personally think 200 is probably the right number, maybe more, but it's never been proven. He was only accused of 27 in his trial. So Holmes was convicted in 1895 and sentenced to death. He was hanged on May the 7th, 1896 at the ripe old age of 34. But even in death, he retained control, requesting to be buried in a coffin filled with cement to prevent grave robbings. Funny enough, his grave was actually dug up, so they didn't actually listen to him when he asked to be buried in a cement-filled grave. Prove he was dead, I read a couple of years after that they actually dug him up just to check if he was still there. His legacy lives on through countless books and documentaries. Most notably is the book The Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. And legend of the Holmes murders, of Holmes' murder castle, continues to fascinate and terrify, blurring the lines between fact, myth, and media sensation. And dare I say it, I feel like, and I know they haven't confirmed this, but I feel like the hotel in American Horror Story, if you haven't seen the hotel series, if you like this kind of stuff, I suggest you watch it because I think it's a very good series. I feel like some elements are based off H. Holmes. I know they have alluded to it being linked to the Cecil Hotel, which I will probably also make a video on. But I think there are elements in AHS Hotel that I feel are a little bit Holmesy. But I don't know. Watch it and let me know what you think. So let's pause here and let's examine Holmes through the academic lens, because obviously this is true crime with a sprinkle of academia through an academic lens. So let's think of the psychopathy and social masking elements of this case. Now, Holmes himself exemplifies the classic profile of a high-functioning psychopath. Because we know he was one. I mean, can do the things that he did and not be on that spectrum of be a psychopath. He's intelligent, he was manipulative, and he was utterly lacking of empathy. He seemed to feel absolutely no way about defrauding people, unaliving people, and had no thought as to how this impacted their families if they had them. He maintained multiple relationships, ran a business or businesses, and participated in society while secretly committing these horrific acts. The duality is a critical concept in forensic psychology, the mask of sanity. And I haven't done too much research into it, but just whilst looking at kind of the definitions, he falls into this kind of bucket of the mask of sanity. In front of people, he seemed like a normal person. He was a likable person. He was a charismatic person, but he was a maniac behind closed doors. He did some absolutely insane things, clearly, and he reaped what he sowed. Because he was obviously taken care of at the age of 34, he got the death penalty, but he seemed normal to people, which that is a very well worn mask, in my opinion. From a sociological standpoint, Holmes' crimes intersect with theories of strain and opportunity, the rapidly industrializing of Chicago offered the anonymity and chaos. The industrial revolution in Chicago, where there was constant change and loads of people coming through. He was able to get away with what he did unnoticed because people were too busy with their lives. And it was the perfect environment for deviance, especially the World Fair happening at the time that it did. It drew people from loads of different places into one melting pot. People from across the nation just coming into Chicago, making disappearances harder to notice, harder to track, and the victims easier to find. It was an easy hunting ground for him, especially given the fact that he was the owner of the hotel. That you just sit back and see the people coming through the door and cherry pick which ones he wanted to get rid of, because it was an easy environment to do that, which is a scary thought. Then you have the media sensationalization, where the turn of the century journalism thrived on sensationalization. Holmes' castle or murder castle became a character in its own right. It was a labyrinth of horror, tailor-made for headlines. And when you see some of the drawings, I'll try and put some in here, of what that looked like and what that translated to, it was something so intriguing to look at that it's no wonder that it made headlines. And as academics, we need to ask ourselves how much of the murder castle narrative was real and how much of it was fabricated, how much of it was constructed by hungry news editors, people who wanted to get that story out and felt, if we word it in this way, it's better to grab the reader's attention better than if we just said, oh, there was a couple of rooms with locked doors and shoots. Like the sensationalization between it, but how much of that was fabricated, how much of that was exaggerated compared to the reality. And then we can also think about the gender violence. Women were targeted, single women were targeted. Not only were they manipulated into relationships with him, they were manipulated into giving away their children to him. And many of the women that were victims of Holmes were often isolated or vulnerable, which is why there's some similarities that we see between the person that H.H. Holmes was and the person that Jack the Ripper was. They both targeted vulnerable, isolated women. And the case brings forward important discussion in gender studies, where you can think about the intersection between power, seduction, and violence. Someone who is so charismatic as H.H. Holmes, having that power over these vulnerable women, giving them a place to stay, giving them financial dependence. He affianced some of them, he got engaged to some of them. So did they become financially dependent on him? And then inevitably the reliance on him them being seduced into this relationship with him inevitably led to their undoing. And do we know their names? Not many of them, because how many outside of that 27 were followed up as being one of H.H. Holmes' victims? That question is left open. Now, I said I wasn't going to go there, and I'm going to go there. The link between Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes. There has been this big theory, and I've watched many documentaries on it. I've done a lot of reading on it. I've gone down a rabbit hole on many platforms about it. And it's the link between the fact that H.H. Holmes could potentially be Jack the Ripper. Are they and could they be the same person? Now, some modern theorists suggest that Holmes may have travelled to London in 1888. Remember, he left Chicago after this exhibition, went travelling. He ended up in Boston, but where was he before 1894? And the year of the Ripper murders was in 1888. The argument rests on the similarities between the surgical position, the victim types, and the timing. The surgical precision, we know that H.H. Holmes dissected some of his victims. We also know that Jack the Ripper liked to open up his victims and in specific areas. And victim types, being vulnerable women, are quite similar. Holmes did study anatomy. Remember, he studied medicine, and he did disappear for stretches of time. But there are problems with this comparison. The first is that there's no evidence placing Holmes in London during the Ripper murders. Yes, we know that he went missing, or he was around and went travelling and wasn't in Chicago at the time of the Ripper murders. He was around during the time of the Ripper unalivings, but we don't actually have concrete evidence that he was in London at the time that these happened. And the second is that the MOs, the modus operandi, are different. The Ripper unalived quickly in public streets, whereas Holmes was very calculated. He planned privately, killed privately, or unalived privately in controlled spaces. He planned out every room, how and where he would trap his victims. And when it came to the disposal, I mean, the Ripper just left them on the streets to be found, whereas Holmes strategically found ways to get rid of these bodies. Now, the critical thinker in me says, okay, we know these two things don't match. However, was it a case of H.H. Holmes at the time was in London, knew he wasn't staying in London, so it didn't really matter how he disposed of these victims? He must have had enough time, because he spent time dissecting or opening up the body and leaving them out for the police to find. So maybe the thrill was, I'm bored of just having people, secretly being disposed of in my hotel. Let's see what it feels like to do it out in the open. That the critical thinker in me says potentially that could have been the reason for H.H. Holmes, aka maybe Jack the Ripper, leaving them out in the open compared to the secrecy of the hotel. However, there is that argument there that Holmes was more organized, whereas the Ripper was more impulsive. I also feel like the critical thinker in me says, but was he though? Was the Ripper more impulsive? Because it takes some organization, some planning, some patience to open up, dissect the anatomy, place it in a certain way, and then go away and write letters to the police and say, this is what I'm missing. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know if he was more impulsive than Holmes. I feel like there is the potential for them to be very like-minded. And we could also argue that Holmes was impulsive. He just had the right environment to look more organized, because it only meant that he only had to make a secret room once, but could be impulsive in that room 20 times. Do you understand what I mean? Like, it say both about both. So, I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. I personally think those two things are interchangeable. Or am I just creating situations to fit the narrative? I'm changing my beliefs because I want to be able to say these are the same people. I don't know. Personally, I feel like you can say, as the Ripper was impulsive, so was Holmes, but vice versa. As Holmes was organized, so was the Ripper. Maybe both figures embody archetypes of evil, because they do. Maybe because both figures embody archetypes of evil, one urban legend feeds the other. The idea of Holmes feeds the Ripper, and the idea of Ripper feeds Holmes. We know that distinctly they are two different people, potentially they are one and the same. It just means that we hate to think that there were two dramatically terrible, awful people in the world at the same time, because they lived at the same time. 1888, there's a potential that H.H. Holmes could have been in London while the Ripper unalivings were taking place. Please let me know what you think in the comments, because I could probably talk about this all day, and I probably am going to make another video just because I feel like we could dissect it a bit further. So what can we take away from the story of H.H. Holmes? Evil doesn't have to always look monstrous. Sometimes it's well dressed, charming, and articulate. Critical thinking is key, especially when it comes to consuming true crime. I think sometimes we sensationalize these evil people, and sensational stories hide deeper truths. They gloss over systemic issues. The systemic issue that I think that is presented here is the fact that it was so easy for someone as charming as Holmes to get away with what he got away with for as long as he got away with it, because everybody was focused on other things and he didn't look like an evil, monstrous person. A bit like the Lucy Letbys, who have done certain things, but because they don't fit the description of evil and monster, it's very hard to put two things together, that this monster has unalived all these children, or this monster has taken the life of all of these people, knowing that two things can be true at the same time. And when writing or researching these topics, it's important to balance objective facts with subjective interpretation. An objective fact is that H.H. Holmes was a murderer. We know this. Subjective interpretation says that he could be the impulsive I'm so sorry. I'm not gonna let it go. I know that there is people out there that have found Jack the Rippers and things like that, but that's opinion. Subjectivity is opinion, is my interpretation of the situation. It's a subjective interpretation to say that the reason he didn't get caught was because he was so charismatic. Was that the reason he didn't get caught? Or was it just because he really planned out how he was going to undertake these disgusting tasks, hence why he didn't get caught for as long as he didn't get caught with? Maybe he did get caught quickly. He was only 34 when he was hanged. So objectivity states the fact. The fact is he was a murderer. The fact is he was the owner of a hotel where he used certain elements of his hotel to lure in people, to unalive people, and to dispose of them. Objectively looking at this, we can say, nope, he was a calculated murderer who, you know, where they talk about intent, the intent was to unalive these people, and especially in the case of Petzel, the intent was to murder him because he was going to gain financially from unaliving him. So that's the objective fact. The subjective interpretation is looking at the loads of different elements that come into it. The assumption that because this event happening in Chicago, this contributed to him being able to do these things. Did it really? Was he just opportunistic? Would he still have done it even if that wasn't there? You know, you have to ask yourself, what are the verified sources? Where might bias creep in? Bias saying that he was charismatic, handsome, and you know, that's subjective, because he might not have been handsome. I don't think he was particularly handsome. But that's my opinion. Okay, and what facts are being left out? Did the editors of the newspapers at the time, did they exaggerate the facts by making the murder castle out to be this fantastically awful place? Did they add in extra information? Did they just state the facts because of the sensationalization behind this whole case? Did they fluff it up a little bit, right? So you have to think about what's being left out or what's being put in. So guys, if this episode gave you something to think about today, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, and I would love to hear your comments below. Do you believe that H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper are one and the same? Or do you just absolutely think it's the stupidest idea ever presented? And if you do, why do you think that? Is it just a convenient theory for thirsty media or for people like myself who would love to think that they are one and the same and there's not that many evil people in this world, even though we know there are? And until next time, keep on sipping your tea, keep on questioning the narratives, and remember, tea may